Thank you. So, thank you everybody for inviting me to have this opportunity to share this reflection, which I previously shared. Father Don just said it with the Passionists on the East Coast back in October with regard to transmitting and revitalizing the Passionist charism. My reflections will welcome them, and I think they served as a catalyst for good conversation back in October. So I'm hoping today that they'll be welcome among you and that they will serve the same purpose. So thank you for having me. And just to so you know, I did do studies in Rome. By uh, education and training a biblical scholar. I've taught in seminaries and universities. I was elected to be on the leadership team of my congregation 4 years ago. And that was almost at the time I launched the program that Father John just was talking about. And it was a felt need from talking to people that in the parishes, people just aren't getting what they find is life-giving and good. So we basically launched that program with maybe a couple hundred participants. We have almost 2,000 now from 9 different countries in every state in the United States. So it's turned out to be a really good thing. Our webinar for next year is going to be on artificial intelligence. I have theologians from all over the United States and people who are engineers coming in. So hopefully it's going to be a good thing. And I welcome you to come. All our programs are free. So anyway, to get started, the work of revitalizing and transmitting a charism, that gift that first animated a founder and continues to animate a community and its mission, is a work of creative fidelity, and it's a work that's always in progress. And it's a work that every congregation of religious men and women are involved in all the time, always trying to find out how to bring what we've been, what we are, into the future. And this work, as far as I'm concerned, requires addressing some urgent questions. And I've outlined four. And these four questions will be the basis of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. So the first one is, what do the Passionists value and want to transmit? What do the Passionists value and want to transmit? Second, how do you partner with laymen and women in the transmission of this charism? And whoever is typing these into the chat box, this is great. So you'll see the questions right there. So how do you partner with laymen and women in the transmission of the charism? Third, what do the people of God need from the Passionists and their partners today? What do the people of God? So instead of talking about you all, what do people need from you? Let's move outside and think about that. And four, what do the people of God need from you individually as a vowed passionist or passionist partner in mission? So today, I'm not here to provide any answers from which many more questions will emerge. So I'm hoping they will, and we'll have a hearty discussion. I'm just here to raise them for your attention and for your discussion. So let's start with that first question. What do passionists value and want to transmit? Everybody thinks they know it, but then when you ask somebody to say, what do you want to value and transmit? You get a lot of blank stares, right? So I think it's worthwhile looking at it. It's no secret that religious orders, both men's and women's, are undergoing radical diminishment. This is not exclusive to the US context, but it's a global phenomenon. It's more pronounced, obviously, in the West and in countries where there is greater economic development. Why we find ourselves in this reality is attributable to a convergence of factors: cultural, social, economic, religious, ecclesial. Whatever the reasons, the fact is we are living in an era of unprecedented change, and nothing is going to be like it was before. Nothing is going to be like it was before. Most religious institutes, and I'm assuming this is to some extent true of yours, have had a growing, even if a begrudging awareness that their situation was becoming increasingly precarious. Anxiety levels, I see it in my own congregation, are soaring as we face the fact that neither our remaining institutions, whether we have monasteries, retreat houses, schools, hospitals, whatever they are, nor our large financial resources, if your congregation is lucky enough to have financial resources, which some congregations don't have. None of that can disguise the reality of the fragility of our existence. We're in a precarious place. Thus, two more questions emerge for consideration. How do we respond to diminishment? And what do passionists value and wish to pass on? In responding to diminishment, I think many people are tempted to think that what we are experiencing is temporary. This is a brief hiatus, which more prayer and more vocation recruitment and more money spent on a vocation director will eventually overcome. So we waited out until things return to normal. Or we can delude ourselves into thinking we are too big and too important to die, as if the church could not get on without us. I can speak, and I'll refer to my own congregation. I mean, my congregation was almost 2,000 people when I entered 55 years ago. We still operate with the idea that we're almost 2,000 strong, even though we're like 260. And I am sure that there are sisters who are convinced that our congregation will not go out of existence because the church desperately needs us. Maybe not. So we can start thinking we're too big and too important, as if the church can't get on without us, or we can resign ourselves, throw up our hands and resign ourselves to the situation and say, whatever God wants. And that's not a bad thing, except if it means that there's a kind of naive supernaturalism that says that, God can press the easy button like they do in, you know, uh, these stores there. I forget the name of the ones that sells paper, the easy button, and that everything is going to be better. No. Yeah, the easy button. There you go. Thank you. What's the name of that store? The Staples Easy Button. Right, you got it. But revitalization is really about change, and change is about letting go, which is hard. As a famous writer once said, everything I have ever let go has claw marks on it. Change triggers our fears and insecurities, makes us claw onto the past, and can give rise to an uncritical acceptance of the status quo. But learning to accept the precariousness and the unpredictability of our situation and acknowledge the sense of loss, acknowledge our fears, acknowledge our anxieties, can actually be a good thing. Why? Because it can lead us into a deeper reflection about what is essential and what it is we want to pass on. That deeper reflection begins with the acknowledgement that your religious institute, the Passionist, as all religious institutes, is not essential. It's not essential, nor is it guaranteed to last forever, as evidenced by the numerous religious orders and institutes which have disappeared throughout the church's history. There's a book by Patricia Whitberg, a sister charity. She's a sociologist of religion. It's a little bit old now, 1994, published at Albany SUNY Press. And her chapter 10, I believe, traces the rise and fall of a number of religious congregations that came into existence and that are gone, right? So there are a number of them, and you can read about their rise and their fall. What is essential is our baptismal consecration, our belonging to Christ. So religious life is a way of living out our baptismal consecration. It is one means among many. Granted, religious have provided incredible service to the people of God, and like yourselves, have kept alive the wisdom and the ways of Jesus. But so have others for whom a traditional religious form of life is no longer the norm, nor do they consider it a requisite for gospel service. And, I see it all the time. You ask young girls, don't you want to be a nun? No. Right? Why? Because they can do what sisters do without buying the whole package, right? And they don't want to do it. So they don't see religious life as normative for service in the check. There is no intrinsic link between those two things. Anyway, this deeper reflection also urges us to ask this: what do you value most? Beyond the congregation itself, beyond the retreat houses and monasteries and schools, what do you value most that you wish to pass on as passionate co-ministers, partners in ministry? So ask, why are you here anyway? What grace has been the cause of your existence? These questions point back to the founding charism, to the grace that awakened in your founder an awareness and a sensitivity to those suffering and in need. That grace awakened in him an understanding that God, who hears the cries of his people, dwells in their midst, that there with the suffering is a place of encounter with Christ crucified, where God sends you, all of you that I'm looking at, and promises to be with you. Is this not a gift, the charism that caused you to leave home and join with others who experience the same awakening? Too often, what religious present as valued are the works, what we have built, believing that by engaging others to continue the works, we have somehow passed on the charism. But the charism is not passed on through ministry. And unfortunately, and I think we've all experienced this, when a competent but charism-less person takes over a ministry, it is often simply a job. Instead, the charism is passed on and remains vital when your awakenedness and sensitivity to the world's crucified awakens in others the same sensitivity to the world's crucified, which compels them to respond, not like your founder, not even like the way you responded, but freely and creatively, urged on by the Spirit to find new ways or reinvent existing ones. I'm in charge of the educational ministry in my congregation, and I tell the sisters all the time, we cannot educate students for the world for which we were educated and prepared, or for the world that uh, the people who educated us prepared us for. And we cannot pass on the charism and expect people to live it for the world that you and I lived it in so many years ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's different. It's different. They have to find new ways or reinvent existing ways. So to put it most succinctly, your charism is transmitted by you, all of you, and revitalized by others who come to share in it because of you. And this is very succinct, but I think it's true. If you have lost the fire, you are only going to transmit ashes. from which no new life is going to be coming forth, no new charismatic life in the tradition of your founder. So if you've lost the fire, you are only going to transmit ashes. Next question. What does it mean to partner with lay men and women in the transmission of the charism? So, inspired by the ecclesiology of Vatican II, with its universal call to holiness, all religious congregations, yours, I can't imagine a congregation that hasn't done it, have tried to live their respective charisms and spirituality more deeply and have invited others to share in that richness. But this has created tensions, maybe not in your congregation, I can speak for mine, and even resistance towards those who have not taken, quote, the vows and appear to be invading our vowed world. But the founding charism is not beholden to structures, nor even to the vowed life itself, nor does the charism's vitality and efficaciousness depend on the vows. Moreover, and I think vowed religious forget this, we are not the owners of our charism. The lay men and women who share your charism must be free to find their own ways to incarnate it, and religious institutes would do well to follow this path of revitalization, supporting and collaborating with your lay partners. The transmission and sharing of the charism, however, should never be confused with the invitation to do as we do, right? To accept certain structures or routine ways of doing them, or kind of be like Passionists but without the habit and the vows, or Sisters of St. Joseph without the habit and the vows. That is not what that means. On the contrary, while your lay partners should be formed and grow with you, you too, and this is, I think, a hard part for all religious, we all have an obligation to learn from them, to be formed by them, and grow with them. This is not a one-way street. It's not like we have a mother lode of charism in us, and we are the sole what's the word I want? The sole repositories of the charism, and therefore the sole disseminators of the charism. The charism is disseminated and given by God. So it's not a one-way street. It's an encounter with others which can enrich our vowed existence and keep you, vowed members of your congregation, and your charism alive in new ways. Of course, sharing the charism should not lead to the blurring of vocations, not simply because there are canonical boundaries, but rather to preserve the unique prophetic power of different vocations. So all religious congregations must strive to embrace those who feel called to journey with them, recognizing their gratuitous and selfless embrace of your charism as a sign of hope to you and as a source of your edification, right? Yet at the same time, as pointed out by the former prior of the Carmelites, his name was Father Romeral, he was a theologian, is now deceased. He said that there must be no confusion, canonical, spiritual, or theological, between these groups. We are distinct. Our partners and vowed members are distinct. Yet at the same time, we need to do all we can to work together, but to maintain the clarity of these distinctions. Now, how do we do that, right? The clarity will not come, as he points out, from shallow conversations and reflections. This happens among women religious. I'm not sure it happens among you guys, but among women religious and our partners, people have opinions. Well, do they want what do they want? What do they want? They want to be like nuns? Well, they should take the vows because look at how hard we've worked in our lives and look at the restrictions and everything, and it's not fair. So there's a lot of emotional baggage that comes into these conversations, right? And so Father Romerel points out the clarity about all of this is not going to come from shallow conversations and reflections or anecdotal comments. All of us need to be profound men and women with a rich interiority who have something to say, and that requires continued theological formation and awareness of your reality. So we're never going to approach this topic from said, she said, that was my experience. Well, I don't really like that person. Well, what do they really do for us? And maybe they just want to be part of us. And why are they here? You hear all kinds of discussion about this, and I think it's a really hard thing. And I think it's hard because none of us who are members of religious congregations have ever been in this place before. In the past, we knew who we were and who the lay people were, and there were clear lines of demarcation. Each group with its own social status and location in the ecclesial hierarchy, and each with its own space. That ordering was clear and for a long time unquestioned, and it gave religious a sense of security. It would be tempting now to narrow your vision, redraw the lines, keep everyone out, believing that somehow segregation is needed for your congregation and your charism to survive. And I'm a Paul scholar, so this is exactly what St. Paul was battling with if you read the letter to the Galatians. The people who basically said, hey, okay, we can let these other people in, but they have to jump through all the hoops that we jump through. They have to get circumcised, they have to refrain from this, they can't eat this kind of food. They got to shape up and come through the same door that we came through. And Paul obviously fought against that narrowness that says there is only one way into the faith community in Christ. So we have to fight against the narrowness that says there's only one way into living this charism, And certainly that narrowness is not an option where Jesus lives and where the gospel is embraced as the rule of life. Where Jesus lives and the gospel values are normative, we're supposed to be communities of expansive hearts and minds, looking at those who share our charisms and thirst for justice, not as existential threats, but as those mutually engaged with us in the upbuilding of God's kingdom here on earth. And in a polarized world, and especially now with polarization at a level of extremism that, I'm 73 years old, I've never seen in my lifetime, it's more urgent than ever to be models of inclusive communities. Question 3, what do the people of God need from the Passionists today? Wow. The Passionist stated charism and mission is to keep the memory of Christ's passion alive and to proclaim God's love for the world revealed through the passion of Jesus Christ. Friends, preaching Christ crucified as the power and wisdom of God was already in St. Paul's day an incredibly hard sell. Preaching Christ crucified as a revelation of God's love, or as, and I'm quoting the Passionist website, as the greatest work of divine love, I think is an even more difficult sell. Why? Because many believers today, whether affiliated or disaffiliated, the people that, they talk about as the nuns, they don't want anything to do with the church. Consider God's greatest expression of love, the creation itself. They're awestruck by the wonder and the majesty of creation. They experience the benevolent heart of the Creator in the tides and in the seasons, in the power of the wind, in the perfection of a flower, in the beauty of sunsets, in the waves that come in on the beach. They resonate with an expression that is found in the papal encyclical Laudate Deum, quote, "The world sings of an infinite love." It is through this everyday life experience of the created order of the world around them that they have come to know God. Apart from what we would consider the usual or the normative expressions of faith and practice, they reflect on the meaning of life. They wish to grow spiritually. They believe in a loving and provident creator God, just like we do. But they cannot understand what that God has to do with Christ's passion. So, how do you bring young people who encounter God through what the church traditionally calls natural revelation, through the created order, to connect their experience of a loving and benevolent creator God with the story of Christ crucified for our sins by the Romans 2,000 years ago? Who cares? This is what you hear people say. I was talking to another sister who's a counselor this morning. She said, "What are you doing this afternoon?" I said, "I'm going to talk to the Passionists." I said, if you think it's hard to move out tradition on love of God and neighbor without distinction, I mean, we got a lollipop here compared to you guys. The love of God poured out in Christ crucified. I mean, that's a hard one. And she said to me, and she's in her 80s, been in the community longer than I have, she doesn't get it either, right? And I bet you if you go around the room and talk to a lot of your confreres and people who spend the time thinking about it, they don't get it. They just don't get it. So how do you bring people to understand this? How do you bring people who connect with a loving and beneficent God I'm looking out at the creation. Our mother house has got 222 beautiful acres. How do you get them to connect that with the story of Christ crucified 2,000 years ago? The two appear to the disaffiliates and to people who are repelled by the notion of sacrifice, and to the many who remain in the church and are still and to many Romanians, they're unable to reconcile the two. They just can't reconcile those two things. It's like this. And they'd rather not think about that. They'd rather think about the God they experience in creation. So listen, it's not that these people, I'm not trying to present them as naive about suffering. It's not that they fail to recognize suffering and only see beauty and live in la la land. They see crucified Gazans starving to death over there. They see Ukrainians being bombed every day. They see the crucified millions of displaced, the sex trafficked, the countless poor, impoverished by the greed of a few. They see the crucified earth ravaged by war, violence, fire, flooding, you name it. They see it. They see suffering in the same places and events where you passionists and your partners in ministry see it. They see it in the same places. What they do not see is how a good God is present in all of that, and how Jesus crucified is relevant to the crucified of today. Now, how do you bring people to see that God's love is so profound that it encompasses both the wonder and majesty of creation and the immense sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, demonstrating a love that endures whatever suffering it must to redeem humanity. How do you do that? And I started today by saying I'm going to raise a lot of questions. I have no answers. Ask Paul Waddell if he's coming back with you. But these are the questions that I think you have to grapple with. How do you get them to see that the cross is not an object hanging on a wall to be stared at, but a window through which we look and we see the same benevolent God that we experience in nature? How can you experience God in nature to connect with the biblical tradition and the church's faith? How do you help people to open themselves to a transcendent wisdom by which the good creator God continues to give life and redemption where one sees only suffering and death? People today, in the face of so much suffering, are dying for hope. Along with embracing the beauty of the created order, they must be helped to embrace the pain and the sorrow and to see that it is there where, quote, the light enters. That's a quote from Rumi, the 13th century mystic. It's where the light enters. It's where suffering becomes transformative and new life can begin, and where hope is found. The world needs a community of dedicated people who respond to suffering, but a community which can also create horizons of hope. That community is you passionists with your partners in mission. But I think, friends, the days are largely gone when you can expect people to have insight into how Christ's life, death, and resurrection might bring about the reconciliation, forgiveness, peace, and healing that they so long for today. They don't understand that. Perhaps the challenge you face in revitalizing your charism and mission is to seriously reckon with the deficits, really, in understanding that people have today. As your own father, I think you pronounce it Bialis, remarked, quote, we must take under consideration the needs of the world today, as did Paul of the course, for the people of his time. This will require that you put aside what you have come to accept as normative expressions of faith and practice, the things you expect, right? And start listening intently to how people around you experience and interpret the transforming work of God in their lives. You know, we all have categories, and we kind of know when people do the things that we're used to and live the way we're used to seeing them live, then we kind of know that they're on the same page. But we have to listen to them and let them talk about how God is working to transform them and do transformative things through them in their lives. That listening, a deep, profound listening, which really syncs up with what Francis was hoping when he began on the road of synodality. That listening is also needed to revitalize your charism so you can advance your mission to meet their needs. And again, religious, sometimes, we live in an echo box. We talk to each other. We repeat the same things. We have to start listening more to our partners, listening to the world, listening to the people around us, even the ones with tattoos. I know it's probably, maybe this isn't the case with you, but I know the sisters get kind of crazy when somebody comes in all tattooed up with a sleeve and everything. And they have like all kinds of, I see you laughing there, John, all kinds of like, predispositions about these people. And some of them are most profound people in the world. Even when I was teaching in the seminary here on Long Island, I was teaching a seminar on sexual ethics in Paul. And I used to go home and say to the nun I live with, I think everybody in my class is gay except this one guy, who talked about his wife, right? And it turned out that they were. By the end of the semester, they all came out gay, and we all had a great lunch and one thing. But long story short, I was over in Rome, and one of the auxiliary bishops here rang me up and said, Marie, you want to go out to lunch? Okay. And I was telling him what a profound experience it was for me to have this encounter with these people who the church vilifies, categorizes, and so on. And I said, they all go on retreats. They have deep spiritual lives, way deeper than I have. And I said, I mean, we've been taught theologically what is this and what's against nature. So I'm telling this, and I'll never forget this. This is why I'm telling you. He starts banging his fist on this Italian restaurant, which I'll never go back to, telling me that I was on the slippery slope, of relativism. And I thought, well, there you go. So, we have categories and we have people that we encounter and we think they are out there, and we shouldn't talk to them. And yet they are the people maybe that we need to talk to the most. So let me get to the final question. What do the people of God need from you as a vowed passionist or passionist partner in mission? In John's Gospel, chapter 12, verse 20, we are told that a group of Gentiles came up to Jerusalem for Passover and said to Philip, "We want to see Jesus." That, friends, is a perennial request, a universal quest. People still want desperately to see Jesus, to feel his love, to experience his mercy, to be assured that there is reason to hope. If you embrace the passionist charism, then you commit yourself, whether you are vowed or laid, to make him seen, to make his love and mercy felt by incarnating Jesus for the world in which we live. So when people today say, we want to see Jesus, your life is supposed to be a response to that request. And I think the attraction of Pope Francis, even the communists over in Italy, I go to Italy pretty often, even the communists that I know, relatives, they loved him. Why? Because I think that he was a response to the question, we want to see Jesus. I really do think people were profoundly impacted by the way he lived his life, the way he exhibited love, mercy, and inclusion. Now, you are supposed to be a response. I'm supposed to be a response to the question, we want to see Jesus. What does that mean in practice? In practice, this means that, like Jesus, whether celibate or not, we live relationally, sharing life with others. Today, and again, I see this with the sisters, may not be true with your folks or friends. We can be tempted to relate through social media, the web, Facebook, our phones, or other non-demanding companions that replace personal encounter, that ask nothing of us, and that protect us from being vulnerable. But if we want to mirror Jesus, be Jesus, then we must allow ourselves to be drawn into profound and loving relationships with those around us, sharing the plight of the vulnerable human persons, the homeless, the mentally ill, the poor and despised, the people who do invade our space and do make demands on us and do annoy the hell out of us. But, it's easy to hide behind your phone and talk to them, but it's that personal encounter, allowing these people to come into our space. We need those relationships. We need them because through them, the poor, the annoying, the pains, the mentally ill, the people who have weird ideas and ideologies, the needy, they evangelize us. They challenge us. They teach us what we must do, and they call us back to the radicality of the demands of the gospel. We must live simply, mindful that everything we have is a gift, which places us in an interdependent relationship to others and to the earth. Our own world continues to be characterized by social and economic separation, just like it was in Jesus' day. And I mean, when you walk around and you talk to people, they are feeling this polarization, economic and social, in spades right now. Like Jesus, we must stand in solidarity with a people and a world impoverished by violence, violence between humans, and violence against the earth and the whole created order. But that solidarity cannot be theoretical in a world of ecological destruction, consumerism, greed, callous disregard for life. And since I wrote this presentation for the people on the East Coast, I mean, in the face of some of the most hateful, violent rhetoric that we've ever heard in our adult lives, some of the most mean and callous ways of dealing with people, some inhumane ways of looking on other people. I mean, we are living in a world that really requires of us solidarity with all of these people. Gospel poverty demands that we strive to live more simply, closer to the daily reality of the poor, sharing what we have rather than striving to be more comfortable and more secure. You know, I guess since I'm on the leadership team, I hear, especially up in the infirmary, I call those recliner chairs decliners, because people sit down in them and sometimes they never get up from them. When you're hearing about, this decline is not good enough, and can you get one from, I forget the name of the place, not Ray Moore and Flanagan, but okay. But, there's a lot of people in the world that don't even have a box to sit on. So we have to think about striving to live closer to the daily reality of the poor rather than striving to be more comfortable and secure. Otherwise, as Ilia Delio, who Ilia Delio is, she said, religious life risks becoming a middle class, mediocre life, nice people doing good work. Yeah, religious life risks becoming a middle class, mediocre life, nice people doing good work. Finally, all we do must be rooted in deepening our relationship with the God revealed in Christ. That requires, as it did for Jesus, time set apart to listen with a quiet, discerning heart and with a responsive spirit to the promptings of God's Spirit. Sometimes, and when I wrote this paper, I started to think about, why did Jesus actually go away and pray? I mean, why did he need to have these conversations with God? Everybody knew he was the Messiah. He was the most sought after person. Everybody wanted him. The apostles constantly said to him, stop going apart and get over here because the people really need you, right? The people really need you. Um, you know, he kind of could have run his own rodeo. He could do a lot of different things, and yet he went apart. He went apart and he prayed because he understood he wasn't running his own rodeo, right? That he just wasn't another healer from another place in another time, that he was a God-inspired person. So, like Jesus, when our minds and our hearts are united with the will of God, which we discern in prayer, then it is the power of God's Spirit passing through us as it passed through Jesus, which gives life to others. If there's no relationship with God, no Spirit empowered ministry, then we risk being seen as self directed functionaries whose works are manufactured by our own efforts and are the fruits of our own wills and our own conceptualization and our own plans. So, friends, in conclusion, A life lived in response to people's plea, I want to see Jesus, is a life centered on God in Christ and on self-giving to others. If you live that life, you live counter to the absolute value of money and materialism, counter to hedonism and body worship, counter to individualism, and counter to every form of authoritarianism. If you live that way, faithful to what is needed and essential in the present, you are, in some ways, ensuring the future of the Passionist charism and mission, no matter how it evolves, by whom it is carried on, or what it will look like long after you are no longer here. Thank you, friends.